Tragically, because of what now has come up, we're going to learn about the laws of autopsy and taking a deceased body and cutting it open to look inside. And we're going to do it as I was reading the news. I was up 3/4 of the night watching live TV out of Israel as the four were being driven back from Gaza up to Kabir for where the Forensic Institute is to do the autopsies. So I was up all night. I was switching between channel 11, channel 12, and channel 14. A little bit more 14. I like them better. And then I went to sleep. And I went to sleep knowing that the four bodies were now in the custody of the Israeli government. It's autopsy people. And they're going to look inside and they're going to find out all kinds of things. Is it true, as the Arabs falsely claim, that the Bibas family, that the mother and the two boys died during an Israeli air attack? To give everybody in Israel a sense that you thought you were hurting us, the Arabs, by bombing, you ended up killing your own. And we knew it's possible, but almost surely it's not. The moment they start moving their lips, they're lying. And so there was going to be an autopsy to see other signs that they might have died from an air bombing or something else. And they were going to do the basic postmortems. And around 3 o'clock this afternoon, California time, or 4 o'clock, I was staying up to date. I always try to stay up to date on the news anyway, but especially when a class is going to begin, because you never know when this breaking news that I have to address, as has happened here. It emerges that after they found baby Ariel, the 9-year-old boy, redheaded, gorgeous kid, and the 4-year-old boy, and baby Kfir, the 9 or 10-month-old boy, who's even more gorgeous, indescribably so, like two of the most photogenic, gorgeous, melt your heart babies ever in history. So they checked on them, and they found Ariel and Kfir, and then they got to Shiri, their mother. And it turns out those bastards in Gaza gave someone else's body. They did not return Shiri. They announced they returned Shiri Bibas, the mother, together with the two boys. And Israel doesn't know whose body that is because it doesn't show up in any Interpol, whatever. It's not any of the bodies it's none of the hostages. It's none of Israel's people. They have the DNA stuff and the finger. It's not, they don't know who that is, but it's not the person that was reported. People like me don't believe a word they say. And when I say the word they, I'm not referring only to Hamas. I'm referring to they. And I'm not using the word as bi gender, tri-gender, non-binary. I don't believe a word they say. I never believe a word they say, not for the last 50, 60 years, since a certain incident happened in the Jewish community of Tekoa in the 1970s. From that day forward, I don't believe a word they say. So I'm not shocked. I'm not shocked. And if it were up to me, maybe the world is better, because it isn't. I would just strafe that place. I would just strafe. Trump says hell. Well, when Trump says all hell will, everyone's talking about it. Netanyahu's saying it. I'd stop talking and I won't even say what I would do. Strafe is all I have to say. And if there are people who unfortunately are not Hamas and get burned with everyone else. So as we say in the New York City subway system, the guy was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. That's the motto of the subway system of New York. Just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They should have gotten out by now. That place needs to be strafed. Okay, but what's the halacha? What is the halacha of cutting open a dead body? Is it ever permitted? Well, clearly, if Israel did it with the Bibas family, and this fourth gentleman, a man in his 70s who actually feel bad for him and his family that he's lost so he didn't get the attention because 3 of the 4 were the Bibases. Really feel bad for him and his family. But if Israel was doing it, that does not prove it's halachically permitted because Israel's not an halachic state, though they consult with rabbis and have chief rabbis and stuff like that. So let's learn halacha and let's apply it to what's going on. And as with everything you've learned on Thursday nights, it turns out there's a lot. That when someone said, oh, we're going to learn the laws of ethics and values in times of war, who would expect that we'd be going on 60 weeks now with no end in sight and always new stuff? When we say we're going to do a subunit on redeeming the hostages, who would expect that that alone is going to be 3 months? And now, or just not going to Egypt. And now the issue of autopsy and the issue in the context of the Bibas family. As the Bibas family was, as the 3 deceased members of the Bibas, as the 2 deceased members of the Bibas family, and plus memory, the soul of Shiri Bibas were being released, there was a tekes, a religious ceremony conducted by the chief rabbi of the Israel Defense Forces. And in that tekes, that ceremony, ritual, service, he read Psalm 83. We'll begin with Psalm 83. Thank you all for being here and joining me to learn these important halachot. May we see a day of happiness, and we'll start when Gaza is strafed. Until Gaza is strafed, there will not be complete happiness. The boy on the left is Ariel, age 4. The boy on the right, Kfir, 9 months at the time of the photo, and he lived 1 more month. May their bloods be avenged. Talk about genocide, the wanton murder and extinction of a people for no reason whatsoever other than that they exist. That is genocide. Genocide is not fighting back at people who attack you, and is not even, unfortunately, killing bystanders during wartime. Genocide is taking 2 little babies and just knowing that they are from a genus, Genus, who has to be exterminated. May God avenge their souls, and may they be among the first to see the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash at the time of Mashiach. Shir Mizmor. Let's see if we can make it a little larger. Shir Mizmor LaAsaf. I'll recite in Hebrew, but you'll have the English alongside. Elohim, al damilach, al techarash, ve'al tishkot el. Ki hinei oyevecha yehemayu, u'misanecha nasu rosh. Al amcha ya'arimu sod v'yatsu al sifunecha. Amru lechu v'nachachi dem migoy v'lo yizacher Shem Yisrael od. Ki no atsu lev yachtav alecha v'rit yichrotu. Ahalei Adom v'Yishmaelim Moav v'Hagrim Gival v'Amon v'Amalek Pleshet im Yoshvei Tzor Gam Ashur Nilva Imam Hayuzra livnei Lot Sela Asela hem Kimidyan Kisisra ki Avin b'Nachal Kishon Nishmedu be'en Dor be'en Dor Hayu domen la'adama Shitemo nedivemo ke'orev v'cheze'ev u'chezevach u'chetzalmuna kol nesichemo asher amru nirshal lanu et no'ot Elohim Elohai shitemo chagalgal ke'kash lifnei ruach ke'esh tiv'ar ya'ar u'chelehava tilahet harim ken tirdafem b'sa'arecha u'v'sufatcha tivahalem Malef nehem kalon, vivakshu shimcha Adonai. Yevoshu v'yibahalu adead, v'yachpru v'yavedu. V'yada'u, ki ata shimcha Adonai levadecha, elyono kol haaretz. In Deuteronomy 21, we've been here before. Perek Aleph Sefer Devarim, we learn a little bit different part of chapters 20 and 21, not discussing war per se or at all, and yet from it we have lessons to apply even at wartime. If someone commits murder, if someone is death eligible, committing murder, a ben sorero moreh, an evil and rebellious son, one of the various kinds of death penalty, death eligible criminals, Urigamuhu kol anshe iro ba'avanim v'met, the people of the city shall stone him to death. Stoning, by the way, we don't have time tonight. It's not the way it's depicted in movies and television where people throwing, it's a very different capital punishment from the way it is depicted in the movies. But he shall be stoned, if that's the death penalty of the crime he's committed. Uvi'arta haram yigerubecha, and you shall obliterate the evil from within your midst. V'chol Yisrael yishmu'u v'yira'u, and the entire nation of Israel shall know, shall hear, and shall fear. V'chi yihiyah b'ish chet mishpetei mavet v'humat, and if there is a man who commits a capital punishment crime and therefore is executed and dies, vitalita oto al etz, he is to be taken and hanged so that the local community will see, because this did not happen every day. This happened once in 70 years, 70. The Mishnah says that if it happened once in 7 years, that a person committed a capital crime to the degree that it would be executed, it would be referred to in the country, they would say, we have a bloodthirsty Bet Din. We have a Supreme Court that is bloodthirsty. Sanhedrin that is bloodthirsty. That's one execution in 7 years. And that the Mishnah says other rabbis have the tradition of having learned that if there's one execution in 70 years, it's a bloodthirsty court. So this is not going on. It's a law that it just doesn't happen. But if there is an execution for a capital crime, a Torah capital crime, he shall be hanged on a tree. A tree, not literally a tree, it could be any kind of gallows. We know that from Megillah, where Haman plan was to hang Mordechai, and the end Tiluhu al ha'etz. They hanged him on it, and it wasn't a tree, it was a gallows. Lo talin nivlato al ha'etz. However, when you hang the capital murderer on the gallows, he must be taken down by nightfall. Ki kavor tikbarenu bayomahum. He must be buried that same day, that night. Ki kilalat elokim talui. V'lo tetameet admatcha asher Hashem lokacha noten lecha nachala. The land must not be polluted with a capital corpse hanging over the land overnight. The body must be buried in full. Let's take a moment to go over the outside parameters of autopsies. There are 2 or 3 compelling reasons that Judaism bans autopsies, and then there are 2 or 3 compelling reasons that people would make on behalf of doing an autopsy. The 2 overriding Jewish concepts are, number 1, the sanctity of the body, that the body is God's vessel. Yes, the mother and father procreated, but God is regarded as a full third partner in fashioning that body. The body is a vessel created by God for one primary purpose: to hold the soul and to facilitate performing mitzvot, commandments. No other reason. The body does not exist to play baseball or to do the laundry. The body exists to do mitzvot, to hold the soul, to learn Torah and do it. Lishmor v'lasot, lahavin, lashmor lasot. That's one of the 2 reasons the body must be treated as God's, not our bodies ourselves. That is a secular Western 1960s and after concept. It is completely contrary to Judaism. There is no such thing as our bodies ourselves. That's godless. It's other countries, and if they have religions that they say that, well, for us that's godless. So that's not only an issue of abortion, which we're not getting into today. You're not allowed to have a tattoo. What does God care if I have it? It's not your body. It's not our bodies ourselves. I love that tattoo. Torah says you're not allowed to have a tattoo. It's his body. Torah says a man is not allowed to shave the 5 corners of his beard, the 2 temples, 2 jaw, and the Kirk Douglas cleft. You're not allowed to shave it with a single blade so that it is completely shaven. Whose business is that? God's business. Not allowed to make gashes in times of velut, mourning, and grief. In Iran, that's something that the Shiite Muslims do. They beat each other with chains, they do. And they cut themselves, they do. At times of grief. We're not allowed to do it. You're not allowed to cut yourself. Torah says you're not allowed to cut yourself. You're not allowed to hit yourself. When the Torah says that you should self-afflict, you should put that Yom Kippur should be a day of self-affliction. It means not allowed to eat, not allowed to drink, not allowed to anoint with oils, not allowed to wash beyond the first knuckle, and not allowed to have physical contact, husband and wife, not allowed to wear leather shoes, not allowed to cut your skin, not allowed to do that. Not allowed. Our bodies belong to him. So that's one of the 2 reasons. And if it seems I've gone on at some length on that, I haven't. I've actually cut it short so we can get in more stuff. But that's why we can't do an autopsy, plain and simple. And there are ramifications to that. A Jew is not allowed to be cremated. If Hitler is going to cremate someone, what are you going to do? Right? You're not supposed to live in Egypt, but Rambam lived in Egypt because he had no choice. You're supposed to fast on Yom Kippur, but if the doctor says you'll die today if you don't eat, so you eat. Pikuach nefesh. And you'll have many, many more Yom Kippurs you can fast. So in the same way, if Hitler, the Nazis, we believe, if you can believe that God can take a skeleton from thousands of years ago and bring it back to life in times of Mashiach, it's no less a miracle to bring the soul back and give it back its body. But voluntarily, a Jew is not allowed to get cremated. A Jew is not allowed to facilitate another Jew's cremation. Big problem. Again, I can't go into all the details. It's a question rabbis have to encounter. Every so often we have somebody comes and says, I have a terrible problem. My father, my mother made me promises in the will, and I'm about tshuva. I started being religious, and I know I don't know what to do. And in the same way, I'm not going to go beyond that on it, just pointing it out to you. And in the same way, there are people that leave in their wills, so they want to be left in like a vault, in like sort of a kitchen drawer. They have like Nebuch, the Reagans, Ronald and Nancy Reagan, Nebuch on them. That because I watched that. I watched that whole day when they brought him, and they brought him to his final place in Simi Valley, and to have him at the so-called Jewish cemeteries here in California, where all the celebrities, one of them in Mount Forest Lawn, right near Forest Lawn, there's Mount Sinai Cemetery, and all the Jewish celebrities are buried. A lot of them, not all of them. Mo, Larry, and Curly are buried at the older traditional one in Whittier, but there are others. The Warner Brothers are also in Whittier, but there are a lot of Jews over there, and they have like kitchen drawers. They have drawers, and they put the body in, and that's it. They're vaults, and it's above ground. So Torah says you have to be buried below ground. It's not that it's nicer. It's God's command. The body belongs to him. He doesn't want it burned. He wants it buried below ground. He said that to Adam. Dust you are and dust you will be. The dust returns to dust. I mean, this is not news. Even a less learned person will have heard that in some or other cultural moment, or just seen a movie. A Christian burial, where the pastor or the priest starts reading from Genesis, and dust thou art and dust thou shalt return. And so the body belongs to God. So you're not allowed to cut it up. That's one reason. I said I'm going to give you a few reasons not to, and a few reasons that are to make the argument you should. But you don't play around with the body. What about for medical knowledge? No. Not allowed unless the doctors truly believe that someone may have something in there that can be found in their body that promptly, immediately can save others. Not that if we'll find something here, we'll learn something so that in 10 years, based on what we're continuing to learn, no, that doesn't work. But for example, it came up when, I don't know how 10 years, everything to me is 10 years ago, or 20. When in Philadelphia, they had that horrible Legionnaire's disease, and nobody ever heard of such a thing. They didn't even have a name for it. So since it hit the people at an American Legion convention in Philadelphia, they called it Legionnaire's disease. They had no name for it. And they didn't know what it was. And everyone was trying to figure out, did it come from the food? Did it come from the air conditioning vents? Some of you may remember this. So the question became, are you allowed to do an autopsy? You got 10 people dead at the hotel, now at the morgue, and you have, I don't know, I'm making up the number. Now you have another 50 in the hospital who are going to die soon because they're showing the same symptoms. Are you allowed to do an autopsy on the ones that are dead, figure out something, and maybe you immediately can say, and the answer is yes. That kind of medical autopsy, yes. Perfect example. But so that not science can learn, that's that's forbidden. And it's forbidden. And it's forbidden to facilitate. And we talk about it. There are all kinds of workarounds if there have to be workarounds. But this is to educate you that the body must be buried in the earth. In Israel, it's done literally. The body is wrapped in shrouds and buried in the earth. Those of you who saw 4 years ago the Levaya, the funeral and burial of my beloved Ellen Zichrona Livracha, Rebbetzin Ellen. So you saw some people were surprised as they were watching on Zoom what was going on in Israel, and they were expecting from what they've seen in America that there would be a coffin. Instead, there was the shape of a body wrapped in shrouds. And some people, was that? Yeah. And that's how they bury. If you ever see the 1960 movie Exodus, starred Newman, starred Paul Newman and Eva Marie Saint. 1960 movie Exodus. Towards the very end of that movie, there's a very incredibly emotional, moving scene where two people get buried, and both their bodies are wrapped in shrouds, and they're not in a coffin. That's the first time I ever saw that. In other places, they have other customs for how the body gets buried. I grew up in the East Coast of America. I was in a coffin. I came to the West Coast in Los Angeles. I saw something I never saw before. Here in Los Angeles, I think because of the earthquakes, that I think the reasoning is because of decades and decades of earthquakes, not the big one, but a 4.5, a 5.7, 6.3. Over enough time, the earth, you don't, like if you have a tombstone or a marker flat on the ground, they really don't have tombstones in most of the more contemporary Los Angeles cemeteries because the earthquakes sometimes knock over the upright tombstones. So in order to keep the body in place so that it will remain under the marker, they put the body, which is in a coffin, into a white cement case. And then the case is lowered into the grave. And little holes are driven, for Orthodox, little holes are drilled into the white concrete case, even as in Orthodoxy, little holes are drilled into the wooden coffins. You may not notice it because it's on the bottom. But when, God forbid, someone's arranging an Orthodox traditional Jewish burial, you have to ask for I don't want to say person has to ask for an Orthodox casket. What's an Orthodox casket? That it has the holes drilled. Why? So that as the body decomposes, it will go ashes to ashes into the earth. Okay. The other reason that would be forbidden to have autopsies is that it is regarded as nivul hames. It's disgracing the deceased person all his life, her life. Take trouble to look decent. You comb your hair, you blow dry. Women put on makeup, eyeshadow, lipstick, rouge. Men have like the the fawns, and if you remember back to the fawns and all those 1950s Italians with the looking like slick hair, and then looking at all the effort they go through to dress the right way. They want their jeans to be cut the right way. We care enormously throughout our lives as to how we look. Even the more modest among us who aren't obsessed with how we look. We all care. We all, when we pass a mirror, we look. Just take a quick look. Who's there? To take that person who throughout an entire life has manifested concern about how he or she looks and to start slicing her up like a salami, it's a big nivul hames. It's disgracing the deceased. And that's actually a Torah thing. You're not allowed to disgrace a body. And how do we know? We just read it. When you execute a murderer, you take down his body the same day. You don't leave him hanging to be disgraced and then chop him up. You must bury him whole, WHOLE. Must bury him complete. Even the worst of the worst, Ted Bundy, I don't know. Eichmann, well, Eichmann was a different ballgame. Eichmann you burn, because Eichmann, first, was not Jewish. None of them are Jewish, so the rule doesn't apply to non-Jews anyway. And also, you can't let there be a monument somewhere where Eichmann's buried, and then you get all these Nazis coming to pay homage to him. But for an evil Jew, even an evil Jew, you have to bury complete. Okay. Why would, well, Rabbi, you've explained so nicely that the body belongs to God and it's spiritual, and people, you shouldn't disgrace them in their death. Why would anybody argue that there should be autopsies? There are three main things, at least to my understanding. Number one, the Legionnaire disease thing. If there's a situation where you actually right now can find the information that could save lives right now, Torah allows it. Number two, it used to be argued that it's needed, that the medical schools need it to train new doctors. There's a lot of debate, and it always came out the same. It's against halakha. It's not against the religion of other people. Other people donate their bodies. There are enough bodies out there that an Orthodox Jew doesn't need to be autopsied for the benefit of medical schools. There is no shortage. They're able to get bodies. Nowadays, the argument is even more that so much is done now with artificial intelligence and all kinds of 3D mapping and everything technology, that not only do the students learn on the computer, but when the doctors get around to actually doing surgery, they don't even make significant cuts anymore. They do it just looking at a camera. My lung transplant, they explained to me what a lung transplant would have looked like in the old days and afterwards. And instead, there's like two little holes. And I've had one or two other surgeries. I had an appendicitis, an appendectomy, one hole, and finished. And the guy just knows exactly where to go, how to go, what to pull, how. I don't even know how he gets the thing out of the hole. Or he's got the. I don't want to spend time on it, but so the argument was you need autopsies to teach medical students. The answer was there's plenty of we don't need Orthodox Jews, don't have to be such tzaddikim to give their bodies against halakha for medical schools. On top of it, everybody knows this. A lot of those bodies do not get treated respectfully and never get used for the teaching of students. They end up in the sidewalk. They end up in garbage cans. There's a lot of stuff. Everyone knows it. I'm not saying most such bodies, but enough such bodies that if they didn't have Orthodox bodies, they would take better care of those bodies. So that's an argument for, argument against. And then there's the argument, two more arguments. The doctor, at the time of death, the doctor made a diagnosis and prescribed treatment, and the patient died. And the doctor wants to know, not out of curiosity, but to save future lives, did he or she diagnose correctly? Did he or she prescribe correctly? Or was a terrible misjudgment, whether an outright mistake or an error in judgment? And the doctor wants to know, not out of curiosity, but let's say the doctor is a lung person, a pulmonologist, and he doesn't understand what went wrong. And then they go and they find out is what happened. They couldn't understand why lung transplants They were having successful transplants, and then people were dying anyway, right away. They couldn't understand it. And so they did autopsies. And they found that the body fights off the foreign organ. And if you want the foreign organ that's been transplanted successfully to remain there and do its job, you have to get rid of the antibodies that are going to go to war against that organ. So you're going to have to give immunosuppressant drugs. And then they probably gave some that didn't work enough. You don't want to kill somebody with too much. And so with trial and error, they probably killed some people by not giving them enough immunosuppressant. And they probably killed others with too much immunosuppressant. Not that that would have killed a lung, but that would have killed the kidneys. Because the immunosuppressants do. So until they figure out the right amount of Prograf, tacrolimus, and Myfortic or Cellcept, mycophenolate mofetil, to give so that it fights off the antibodies, preserves the organ, and doesn't destroy the kidneys, they probably needed a bunch of autopsies and a lot of different hospitals. So that would be an argument that would be brought to rabbis why that autopsy might be okay. But not another person who just died from the flu, God forbid, God forbid. Unless the doctor would make a compelling case to the rabbi that he or she tried a different medicine and whatever. So the only other kind is the following. If there's funny stuff, suspicious stuff, if a person dies by an accident or potentially murder or drug overdose, and for this I will, for example, teach you something here in California. It's the same in most every state, but I've practiced in California before I decided to go inactive this year, Mazel Tov, and I actually had a few cases where I had to practice this exact law. It's in the government code. Under California law, if a person dies a natural death, and the family says, start it again. If the person dies a natural death, and the county coroner wants to do an autopsy, he or she may do so. But if the family, the survivors come and say, we oppose it, he or she may not do the autopsy. Simply by their say-so. Simply by the family, nothing in writing, and it doesn't have to be the deceased having previously made. That's if the person dies a natural death. If the person dies an unquestionable homicide, murder, no way, there must be an autopsy under California law. Doesn't matter what religion, who you are, how much documentation, if there's a murder or a homicide, drug overdose, mandatory. Why? Because if nothing else, they need the evidence at trial. They need exactly the amount of drugs and to know which drugs, to be able to trace it back to the person they arrest for selling the drugs. They need to find the bullet and determine whether that bullet came from this gun, and so on and so forth. They need it for evidence. And you can argue, as an Orthodox, I shouldn't say you, and a person can argue that as an Orthodox Jew, it is so important, since the body is the vessel of God and must not be disgraced. As an Orthodox Jew, it is so important to preserve the dignity of the body that the family is willing to waive its rights to have the murderer prosecuted or the drug dealer prosecuted, understanding you won't have evidence, and therefore you can't get a conviction, and the family's coming and saying, we don't care, forget about a conviction. California and all the states pretty much have it as a statute, a law in the books. No matter, there will mandatory has to be an autopsy to look for evidence that could be used at trial. And then there's the middle ground, not where it's a 100% obvious natural death, not where it's 100% obvious homicide, but when someone dies from an accident. Classic case, an elderly person. In the old days, you had to stand online at the bank. Now you can do it with a smartphone. Still, people go to the bank. But I remember my college years, I'd go to the bank, I'd run a little short on cash. You had to wait like an hour. Momish, not an hour and a quarter till on the bank. They have 10 teller stations and one teller working. Same thing at the post office for those who still go to a post office. So I've known of situations too that I personally have been brought in as the rabbi, where they were standing on line at a bank, and the claim was that the air conditioning was not strong enough on a summer day, and the elderly person passed out, landed on the head, a cranial, is it a hematoma, whatever, and something like a subdural hematoma, and the person died. So it wasn't a homicide, and it wasn't natural death. It was death by accident. Under those circumstances in the state of California and most states, it's treated like a natural death in that, I'm sorry, it's treated like a murder death in that the state takes the position, the county takes the position there must be an autopsy. However, if the deceased left behind written document, and it does not have to be a form, it could be just a handwritten note with misspellings and bad grammar. If the deceased left behind a written document that because of his religious beliefs, and they must have the word religious in that statement, because of his religious beliefs, he does not want an autopsy done in the period. Could add in the event of accident, but even better, period. Because of religious beliefs, don't want an autopsy done. If it's signed by two witnesses, the family just has to pull out that document, and the coroner is forbidden from doing the autopsy. So in my career, we've had an elderly person who passed out subdural hematoma on a bank line. We had another one, had a child who died, like a 6-year-old, was spending Shabbos at the grandparents. Grandparents went up to go to sleep, take a nap. They left the 3-year-old, they left their 9-year-old in charge of the 3-year-old. The 9-year-old went swimming, because even though they were told in the past they should never go swimming on Shabbos because of Judaism, you don't go swimming on Shabbos, it's not Shabbostic. But they always did go swimming on Shabbos because the rabbi's not there and he's not going to know. As if God won't be there. No. So the 9-year-old went swimming, came back, forgot to close the gate, and a little later forgot to watch the kid. The little kid went through the gate, drowned to death. So the focus was convincing the coroner that it needs to be treated like an accident, because drowning in a pool is not natural death, and it's not exactly homicide. So we needed a document in which the deceased said that because of religious reasons, he opposes having an autopsy. But the deceased was like 3 years old. I guess I could say it this way. By a great miracle, a piece of paper was found a day or two later written in crayon, misspellings all over the place. I don't want autopsy because religious, spelled like Rilijus, Jewish, Jooysh, and two witnesses, two members of our shul. By coincidence, they had both visited the family when the kid was born. So that's how that's dealt with. And then It was a tragic case of a drug overdose. I got a call from Chicago. Parents in Chicago, their son unfortunately had become a drug addict, had moved to California, got himself overdosed, died in a motel room. And now that all that was left, what else can we do for the son? What else can you do for your son that you love so much? Nothing else you can do. Well, at least protect him from being autopsied. And in California, it had to be autopsied because of the drug overdose. So that brought us to the one other thing a rabbi, an Orthodox Jew, can do. If there must be an autopsy, no ands, ifs, or buts, you can demand, if you have a strong rabbi, he can demand minimally invasive. So they know what they need to look for, but if they need to cut that open, they don't necessarily need to cut up everything like they're skinning a fish. They know what they need. And the one such case in my career that I was involved in, that coroner's office was so respectful, Orange County Coroner Office. So we've now learned about autopsies. So what's going on here? Make sure I'm going on time. 7:30, a little bit more for tonight. We're going to go on for several weeks with this. The bastards in Gaza made a big ceremony, and made a big ceremony. If you have a few moments, I'll sneak preview from Sunday's class. See how am I going to do this? Let me just do this. See if I can do this. Hopefully you can see, and let's see, I'm on share, and take that off. See if we can get this done. And Denise, if I lose visual, please let me know. But go that, playlists, next week, new. All right, here we go. Yeah. So Hamas made a big thing that they're returning the family.
And evil. And civilians have come out to celebrate. They're filming. They've taken their children like it's some fun day out to watch the coffins of a baby and a child and a mother on stage. Israeli Ambassador Amir Maimon spoke about the plight of the Bibas family today at our summit.
Let me try to find a piece.
In just a few hours, 4 of the 73 Israeli hostages are expected to be released.
I want to get specifically, just bear with me one more moment. I was not intentionally going to do this, but it's so much in the context to understand why this is so important that they had to do they had to do it. Let's see, Sky News. Try this one. Try this one. It's one of these three.
Hamas terrorists finally releasing the bodies of 4 Jews they kidnapped from Israel 16 months ago.
Okay, here we are.
Or had died on them. 3 of the Bibas.
This is what they did yesterday or today. This is what they did. For those of you who've been coming to our Sunday morning programs, you've seen this basic before. When they release hostages, they put them on stage and they make a whole pageant and celebration. What they did was they put them on the similar stage, but they had a grotesque caricature of Netanyahu. And instead of live hostages waving to the crowd, 4 coffins.
Months ago, and killed or had died on them. 3 of the Bibas family, mother and her 2 boys.
So these are the coffins. 1, 2. There are 2 others, either on left or right. This is their propaganda. Hamas so their propaganda, so that the media can read it. The war criminal Netanyahu and his Nazi army killed them with missiles from Zionist warplanes. And for the benefit of Israelis who wouldn't know, they write it in Hebrew, Ratzach otam busha hamilchama Netanyahu, bitlei hametosim hakraviyim. Okay. So, and that's their logo of Hamas. And that's the photographs, the pictures of who's in those 4 boxes.
Here of the Bibas family, mother
Public
and the 2
display,
boys,
a public pageant.
one a baby, and a great-grandfather, Oded Lifshitz. Well, the absolute barbaric little ritual there. They held up a sign, Hamas did, blaming Netanyahu for killing them all. I mean, seriously. It wasn't hold hostage and stick in tunnels for a year or more the babies and their mother. What animals would do
Watch how there are people with smartphones videoing it.
that and not tell Israel that they had died and let the families suffer in uncertainty and
A public display, a public spectacle.
grief and fear and panic for all these months. And now, look at them. Look at those monsters. Look how well fed they are too. All this talk about Israel using starvation as a weapon of war. Look at those well-fed monsters. Dragging these bodies like trophies, and also to exchange for dozens and dozens of Palestinians that Israel's been holding in jail, many of them.
Okay, so obviously Sunday we'll have a lot more of that. But my point right now is that they brought 4 boxes. If there had not been an autopsy, if the first stop had not been straight from Red Cross, that the Red Cross itself bring the 4 coffins straight to the Israeli post-mortem center. And if Israel only would have done it tomorrow, all the anti-Semites in the world, from the European Union to American college campuses, not to mention Arabs, would be saying that Israel switched the bodies. So they had to go straight in full public view of the whole world. Literally, there were, as I said, I was watching TV for 6 hours last night. There were all cameras, the whole thing. And turns out, as they did the autopsies, the body that was represented as being the mother, Shiri Bibas, is not she. It's someone else. Nobody knows who she is. Could be some Arab, could be some Jew, but Israel has no record of anybody with that DNA. So this is why, and under circumstances in which autopsies may be done. Now, that's it for tonight. And having concluded our unit on Egypt, we're now into the unit on autopsy. It has great relevance at times of war, so it's a perfect fit for our ethics and values in wartime, because unfortunately, war often comes with people dying, being killed. And people dying, being killed, comes with having to have their bodies identified. And that comes with autopsies, it's part of it. And it's even part of Americans, the American soldiers who wear the dog tags, just in case. But then there are situations where people switch the dog tags for different reasons. So autopsy is part of our subject, and we'll just get into it now because now it couldn't be more relevant. May God again avenge their deaths. May they be among those who are among the first who see the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem in Mashiach times. And may Jews find the strength to be strong and to stop crying. It doesn't take strength to cry. May Jews have the strength to know how to say no and to fight and to put an end to this already. Shabbat Shalom. Oops.